All right, folks, welcome back to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris, and I'm joined, as always, by Tim the Source Anderson. It is 10 o'clock, Thursday, Eastern Standard Time on April 16th, which is the first day of round two for Trump checks, right, Tim? So if you are in, and we can answer questions and talk about this more a little bit later in the show. But if you are in category 2, which is Social Security, railroad workers, SSDI, and other brackets, today is the first day that you will see the government begin to get those checks out, and it will last 2 weeks, folks. Okay, so if you don't see your money pending in the bank, give it some time. They're waiting on this, especially Social Security folks. They're waiting on information from the Social Security Administration. We got a lot to talk about today. That's not really everything we're going to speak about. We're going to talk, of course, about the jobless claims numbers, new residential construction that came out. And today's voter analysis is North Carolina. Polling has come out, which has given us a nice way to do this because it's in the conversation. So we've done Ohio, Iowa, Michigan, Pennsylvania. We did Florida first, and now we're going to get to North Carolina because of the poll that came out yesterday. And we'll talk about that, showing Trump with a pretty nice sizable lead there. But there was a lot of talk about the polling and over-representation. Remember, guys, not oversampling. And we're going to open it up and we're going to show you all about that. But for now, as always, let's take a look and see, before we get into everything, let's take a look at the markets and get an idea of what's going on out there. What's happening out there, Tim?
Well, we're a little bit lower. The Dow is down about 200 points, just about 1%. NASDAQ not down, not quite as much. S&P off. The market has been on the decline since the opening. There are, I think, mainly because of headlines of a couple of new large-scale layoffs from a big movie chain, and a couple of other. Also, Google said they're going to curtail their hiring plans that they had for the remainder of the year. Advertising revenues significantly down, both in print and digitally. And I think that you've also got a decline in the airline stocks, despite the rescue package. And really, it's the big multinational industrial stocks that are taking the most of the brunt of the market selling this morning.
All right. And we do have some bad economic data. Let's just jump right into that, folks. Okay. So this morning, 8:30, we got the jobless claims report. Let's pop that up. There we go. Jobless claims are up another 5.2 million. That is slightly more. And there's your handy dandy little chart. Let's zoom in on the 1 year just to give people an idea. That's what we're dealing with here, folks. Okay. Now, there are a couple of things to note here. It's right here in the subheadline too, Tim. We saw the actual number of insured unemployed tick up to a high, but that rate which was just 4 or 5 months ago, this rate had fallen to the lowest rate ever in history, 1.1% under Donald Trump, and it remained just a tenth of a percentage point off of that low at 1.2 for weeks and weeks and weeks. It dipped. It only changed to go down back to the low twice since I want to say, Tim, December 2018. It fell first, and then I want to say since that date we haven't been above that until this started with mitigation efforts. So we got another 5.2 million for the week ending April 16th. And that's a decrease from the previous weeks, which was upwardly revised, by the way, but it is a slight decline. It was revised 9,000, all right, to 6.6. The forecasts, they range from a low of 2 million to a high of 8 million, and the consensus was 6 million. So we came in a little bit lower. I do want to say, yeah, but this is, not good, folks. So I don't want to make this out like this is happy land numbers. For the PPA, and I was going a little bit berserk on Twitter before with Mark Cuban, the interview I saw as I was getting ready for this show. And he's on the president's council, and he definitely holds the view, Tim, that we need to keep this thing shut down longer than the president wants, because the worst thing that can happen to these businesses is for a resurgence in cases. And that's, very easy to say for a billionaire who doesn't have to worry about filing for unemployment. He's on the, economic calamity crew. So, this is where I have a problem with this, Tim, from the jump. From the start of, you know what? Before I get into my little monologue on my problem with people like Mark Cuban, here's the insured unemployment rate. Okay. This is the entire series since the labor market has been measuring this puppy. All right. We've had, like Tim and I spoke last week about the recession in the 70s and how deep that recession was. And at that point, that was the last 6.8%. Okay. Was at the heart of that recession. Look at this jump here. Look at this jump. Now, we can use all the talking points about it being artificial, whatever you want to talk about. All right. However you want to try to justify this. But if you look at where some of these states, Washington State, folks, they have the worst behind them. Rhode Island is in, the Rhode Island governor is in the group of Northeastern governors talking about reopening. If you live in Rhode Island, she went a little bit off the rails for a while, Tim, but if you live in
I will tell you that Providence is getting hit really hard right now because they're kind of equidistant between Boston and New York. So anybody that's traveling back and forth and stopping in Providence, that's where their big outbreak is coming from. Also, right. A couple of big colleges there.
And then Michigan really is the only state here in the highest uninsured unemployment rate. Michigan, though, is the only state where it remains to be a large, it's very concentrated to a certain area in Michigan. We saw protesters out there yesterday, and, they said, I heard the one say that, Michigan, the entire state, that maybe they have cases in Detroit, but the entire state is on life support, right? And you're getting
and 90% of their cases are in the metropolitan Detroit area.
That's right. And yet they've seen very draconian policies by Governor Whitmore out there. And they're in the category of the largest increases. But California, who's had essentially nothing, Gavin Newsom, he wants this thing shut down forever until there's a vaccine. Folks, where I'm going with this is we're starting to see this really hurt places that don't have problems. And I think the major problem in the beginning of this debate, Tim, is that there have been people who are neither at risk of feeling the economic pain from this thing, nor at risk from getting and having complications from the coronavirus, driving the debate on this thing. And this has been a major problem. Nothing they can say can ever answer the simple fact that this has never been done in the history of the world. And you have never seen in the history of series indicator tracking at the Department of Labor, you have never seen this kind of damage. And Mark Cuban even conceded, by the way, that what this does tell people when you look inside and look around and who's getting hit by these, it's unfortunately, it's just a huge impact to small businesses, to at least to some extent. And then he's on the president's council, so he's hearing from people. The PPA loans as fast, and Tim and I praised that program. Tim, have you ever seen a big government program get out there that quickly before?
No, and it got a lot of pushback, and it got a lot of flack, all unwarranted, because the speed of the program being rolled out within a week, there was clearly going to be some glitches and some hiccups along the way. And you were clearly, there was just way too much on the line for them to not fix everything and get it working. So they basically just kind of powered through the problems that the program had initially, as applications came in and as it got, things got resolved one by one over time. It's been very successful. It's almost totally subscribed right now. And I think one of the most interesting dynamics of the whole program was It was the smaller banks and the community banks that had a much easier time adapting to that program and going through the application process and getting everything done and getting money out to their uh, small businesses that were looking to loan money than the great big banks. It just makes sense that these small community banks, small savings and loans, and smaller financial institutions knew their customers a lot better at the ground level than the great big mega banks, Bank America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, et cetera, et cetera. Wells Fargo had a different problem. It was really not their problem. It was a structural problem where part of their regulatory oversight issues from correcting from their settlement with the Department of Justice was they couldn't loan above a certain amount of capital. They finally got that lifted, and they did a lot more business after that. But really, the big banks were very skeptical because they wanted assurances that things weren't going to come back to bite them after the fact if some of their loans were being made to customers that were giving them fraudulent information, because they got so much negative pushback after the fact, following TARP, following Dodd-Frank, and they basically viewed the fact that the government had just abused them because they knew they were such an easy target in the eye of public opinion.
But I will say there are, and so what, like ever, I wouldn't even disagree with a single thing Tim said. And the community banks being more at the local level did know their customers better. They had more success once they got everything ironed out, which Mnuchin, I will say this, Tim, he made good on that promise. If you remember on that Friday, we got a hold of the hold of the Treasury Department and said, you know, what is going on here? There are community banks who have no idea what to do, and they don't even have an application process. They gave people the actual application, but essentially told them don't file it. A lot of banks were doing that. Just hold on, because we don't know. We don't have guidance. Right. And so, but I'll give them that. But unfortunately,
right, I think they probably worked 24 hours a day through the weekend to resolve as much as they could. Sure. There was still a few things to be resolved, you know, early that week. But look, they just powered through it.
Right. Well, and you know, here a couple of weeks later, the program's almost out of money. Democrats won't re-up it. She won't even come back. Nancy Pelosi, she won't even come back and bring lawmakers back to DC to have a vote on this thing. So, you know, I think that the two major, I don't even know if we can call them failures. I mean, I guess, you know, but the two major problems with this program and one is that may be one of the only true things Mark Cuban said that were accurate in that interview. One is, I mean, just from some of these numbers, yes, we can tell that some of the money just didn't get there in time. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't see this, folks. I mean, let's take a look at that again. Look at that. I mean, at the end, you know, that was supposed to hold that back. If you asked the White House what their estimates would be right now, we're several million off of where they believe the PPA would hold it. And then the second thing that Mark Cuban said, so I guess I'll give him two, Tim. I'll give him two true things. The second thing that he said is that from a lot of people that he's speaking with, they're having a hard time telling their employees, thank you to Democrats who put the provision in that bill, in the bailout bill, the coronavirus stimulus bill, that they're having too many people say to them, thank you, but no thank you. I'll keep my unemployment for now. And if they do, that's fine for the business owner, because as long as they made a good faith attempt, then that still counts as forgivable to them. So, you know, they can count that as their parachute, whatever, if their business winds up not going to reopen. But they at least made that attempt. And so I think that probably has something to do with it as well, folks. I mean, big government just cannot swoop in and always save us from ourselves. It's just, that is one of the inherent failures of government. They moved that, like Tim and I are saying, they moved that that program blazing speed for a government. It could not have gotten out. Right, Tim? I mean, could you have really, without some small hiccups, if those of you there
were a lot of people that commented that shortly after that program that have had a lot of experience with rolling out big government programs before, that it was an astoundingly short amount of time to
Yeah.
get that thing out and online for a $350 program.
And Tim, for those of us who were alive and in the workforce to remember during the Great Recession, it took the government after the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. It took the government months and months and months to get out $250. Remember that? And
Right.
then some of them didn't even get that. They ended up as something they could put on their tax return at the end of the year. It wasn't even, they were tax credits essentially, if I remember correctly. Right,
Right.
Tim? That
Right.
wasn't my specific situation, so I don't know, but I don't know exactly how it worked, but they didn't get a check. They for $250. I mean, it's just ludicrous. So to me, any failures that we hear from small businesses, there was nothing else that could have been done with this outside maybe of Democrats not poisoning that bill with that provision. I opposed that provision. I told people that this would happen when they passed it, and now people on the Economic Council from Cuban and others like Kudlow are saying they definitely see that, which is why they were.
Which provision was that?
4 million. The provision, the unemployment provision that Democrats put in there,
Which
and
was
that's why it allowed people, number one, to extended the unemployment benefits. So if we open up tomorrow, we don't want people to remain collecting unemployment until July. It's really two parts. And then secondly, depending on what state you're in, you can conceivably collect more. That is absolutely true. It depends on what state you're in, but you can conceivably collect more on unemployment than by not. And then also too, there's something, Tim, that I think is just unique to this crisis, which is that some people don't want to go back to work because they don't view it to be safe, which is why you were always hearing me hammer all of these people who talk about how at risk you are if you're 35 years old or 20 years old and you're a student trying to work at a restaurant. I mean, that's just nonsense. We've been over this data ad nauseum, but there are people out there who fear going back to work because of what we did, because of how we handled this thing, and because of the information that got out. So, and I see it actually. I mean, I live in a university town. I see it here. I mean, there are like student age people walking around terrified when they have to run to a grocery store. It's weird, honestly, but so there we have it. So if you were at the White House right now and you asked Larry Kudlow, what did you expect these unemployment claims to be given PPA? He would tell you closer to 4 million. And the same was true. But you know what? This is the week we would have saw that. So whatever misses were last week, Tim, really, we kind of have to shrug that off, not shrug it off, but
I mean, 4 million, 5 million, you're talking a variance of 20%.
Yeah, well,
I mean, how many times
every million counts. I'm not going to.
If you'd be looking for, how many times would you be looking for 160,000 ads to non-farm payrolls, and you'd get 200,000?
It's the totality of the numbers.
That's a variance of 25%. So
it's the totality of the numbers, though, Tim. You can't shrug off a million people. That's a million suffering people. I mean, or. A million people are this is their new reality. I think what's sad, the most sad part about this is that was the difference between the Obama and Trump economy. There was the Obama economy was like a survival economy. The Trump economy was a thriving economy. So It's the difference between surviving and thriving. And that's the sad part about this. Like I mentioned before, the insured unemployment rate, this is not something big media, like every time this report is released every week, which they ignored all the time. We were almost alone in this space, Tim, covering jobless claims, with the exception of CNN Money, which doesn't make it on the network, and CNBC, with the exception of, coverage like that. We were essentially, it was just like you and I until everyone cares now. Right. But we would look at these numbers, the insured unemployment rate that nobody talks about, and we would say, God, that's great. 1.2, 1.1. I mean, it was just numbers we've never seen before. And I could bring up the chart to show people, but the bottom here, let's take a look at it one more time. There's the insured unemployment rate, folks. It was beautiful. it was a beautiful thing. I don't want to sound like Donald Trump here, but it was the most beautiful insured unemployment rate in the
Rich, just give
history of the
people
labor
the
market.
actual definition of what that really means.
Right. So if here, you know what I could do? I could read off too. All right. So this is advanced, by the way, meaning it can be revised. It's lagging data and it's for April 4th. So it's the totality of people who are insured by unemployment benefits. There's a number, which is you have to distinguish between the rate and the number. We're talking about numbers down here. Okay. The total now is about 12 million. And just so people know, Tim, the total number has been higher during the Great Recession. We just haven't seen, we've seen levels in the total number close to this during the Great Recession. It just didn't happen so quick, abrupt, and and at once. We didn't have an increase of 4.5 million. And this is the roll, it rolls. So today's unemployment was the initial jobless number that came out. The number of people who first time initially filed for jobless claims, it was 5.2. That gets later rolled into lagging data, and the seasonally insured unemployment rate is the rate for those people. And again, that's April 4th, just like the number. And it's the highest level for the series. Last week we saw the highest level for the actual number. And it's, again, let's hope for a little bit better decrease tomorrow. I mean, next week, but we will see. All right. We'll see. All right. Getting back to us and our pretty faces.
Well, eventually that number will tail off because it's first time unemployment claims.
Yes.
So
initial, right.
As we go another week into next week and the following week, most people who are going to be on unemployment will have already filed. So that first time unemployment claim number will start to tail off probably next week.
Yeah, that's what we already saw a little bit of a dip this week. We just didn't see the amount that the White House and others were hoping for. If you go back and look at that consensus forecast, they were on the low end of that consensus, and that's what they were hoping for. PPA would stave off, but as Tim and I talked about, it still was an incredibly
so if you're talking about 22 million
program.
people, 22 million people have filed first time unemployment claims. Just real rough ballpark. You're probably looking at an unemployment rate.
That's what I was going to ask.
North of 15%.
Yeah, it's
maybe 17 or 18%.
That's what I was going to ask Tim to explain next. What does this mean for the unemployment number? We're going to get that report in a couple weeks, Tim. What, about a week and a half now? Something like that. What's April? 30 days, 31? I don't even know.
Yeah, we'll get it in. I don't have the calendar right in front of me, but today's the
folks.
Today's the 16th. We'll get it in 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Yeah, last Friday of the month, basically. So
first Friday of the month.
First Friday. Sorry, yeah, first Friday.
So we'll get it. It'll be in early April. We'll get it early May. We'll get it the first 2 weeks from tomorrow.
And the reporting period for this new report will be up to April 12th, probably.
Yes.
And they will revise the March, because March is only until it's household survey.
So I think March will be revised significantly higher.
Significant. Yeah.
And April will have an unemployment rate maybe around 13 to 15% with a little bit of a lag.
Yeah, I think I would agree with those estimates. I think that's totally right in the ballpark. And then with the new report, we're gonna see something. We're gonna see something ugly. It can't be any other way, Tim. Even if people and this is why I couldn't stand that provision, because yes, we were always going to see this. Now it was always a matter of time. How long was it going to take for this rate to come down? And putting in those provisions, Democrats love that crap. They love that. They want you to collect that check. They don't want you to go back to work. I mean, it's really a time. I'm at a point now, Tim, where, you know me, I always try to appear impartial. But we're at a point now. We are at such a historic place. I mean, we have to drop some of these pretenses. Democrats don't care if you're collecting unemployment instead of working. They would rather you collect unemployment than go back to work. That is that is true. And don't you think for a second that there aren't people out there, including people around the president, which has always been his biggest flaw, who are stoked that he isn't going into November with a 3.8, 3.6 unemployment rate. They don't care what that means for you. They couldn't care less. They don't live by you. Their neighborhood isn't next to yours. They don't have to see it. They don't have to feel it. They are raw power people. End of story. And, at some point, Tim, I'd like to just lay out the headlines for people first. But at some point, there's just some stuff I got to get off my chest because I'm just tired of, I have to drop some of these pretenses is my point. This pretentious nonsense. They're like not allowed to say the reality of things, Yep. Good morning to you all too. So I see your morning comments. Tim and I rambled on for about 25 minutes before. And then before we go to the break, Tim, which we have a few minutes here, not even a break. It's just us, doing our spiel, a word from our sponsors. Let's talk real quick about the new residential construction numbers. So what that means, guys, is housing starts, building permits, and housing completions. They get wrapped up into a report by the Census Bureau. And I think it's jointly actually with the HUD and the Census Bureau. And housing starts, building permits are really the ones that everyone focuses on in those reports. That's what we get a forecast for. There are some forecasts for housing completions, but that's not, it's just not the focus of that report. So we had a low end, Tim. The forecast range was about 1.23 million to a high of 1.45 for housing starts. The consensus was 1.35 million. And we came in at 1.21 million, which is a very large drop. It's a drop of, let me look at it here, 20 something percent. 22.3, Tim. I think it's even rolling on the thing. I know we plugged it in, but 22.3%. Building permits, they're down 6.8, not as bad. And what's happening here, folks, is the mitigation efforts and the shutdowns. Okay, and I can tell you this and how it impacts new construction from experience because I am somebody building. So these county offices close. They can't get these inspections out. They need the permits to start, to break ground. And you can't either drastically slow down or there can be complicated, am I putting that right, Tim? There could be like complicated circumstances that the county government is just not at the moment up to par to be able to handle. So, for instance, in my situation, Tim, I got very lucky. We got that building permit in before for groundbreaking, but my neighbors, my soon-to-be neighbors, have extenuating circumstances with the way the land is and where they can come in to bring everything and build. And unfortunately, my neighbors haven't gotten their permits. They're like 6 months behind schedule now. So it has a real impact because of these closures. These government closures. And every time, by the way, they lay the foundation for the house, they need to have an inspector come out.
Right.
They frame the house.
At every stage. There's an inspection that has to be done for the plumbing, for the gas line that's underground, for anything that's underground, any hookup underground, any electrical hookup, et cetera, et cetera. So, but that's going to have a snapback effect.
Yeah, well,
that's going to have a snapback effect. I view though, it's interesting that those declines are very similar to the declines in retail sales for the go out of your house and go somewhere physically and do some shopping, furniture, gasoline, and major items you'd get at a store that people have probably clothing,
durable goods,
anything that's durable goods or clothing. And that's a very similar percentage, that 22%. That's similar to what we saw yesterday in those durable categories for retail sales. I think the building permit numbers will snap back much faster than the retail sales numbers.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
And the National Association of Home Builders, if you looked at the housing market index the other day, it was a historic plunge. It fell 42 points. It was god awful. We were at a high. It was, or at least we were right off the high because again, another indicator that we hit a high under Donald Trump. Now we're hitting an all-time low. I told you guys before that Trump is the man of records. The Trump era is the era of records, record highs, record lows, record swing this way, record swing that way. This is the way it is under Donald Trump. But with housing, getting real quick back to housing, those building permits will snap back. But what that means in the real world is, again, I got lucky. But what that means for my neighbors who were like me, trying to time the completion, the actual housing completion, to be done for, like, if we have children, you don't want to bring children in the middle of a school year if you're moving from one district to another, one state to another. I mean, so, granted, I'm going through it right now, so I understand it, and I got lucky. But I understand that could have really thrown a wrench in our plans. Plans, by the way, we've had in place for years. So I can understand. I sympathize with people. Is my point, Tim? I mean, this really sucks. This is not. It's not cool for people. That's for sure. We have spoken to a couple banks, also with housing. I want to bring up. It's going to be, at least in the short term, more difficult for people who aren't looking to the VA for lending. Wells Fargo. There was some other one, Tim. Several other ones. I don't remember right now, but if you do want to buy a home, watch your FICO, because they're increasing
They're going to raise
standards
their
for your
standards until
scores.
the dust
Yeah,
clears. There's no
and
doubt about it.
that's going to happen. And also, the amount that they want down on a home is going up, and
Right.
probably,
Right.
I don't foresee it going up any more than 20%, but
Right.
20% is, and there are groups out there that love that, though, Tim, like AEI, the American Enterprise Institute. They have the housing risk, their Center for Housing Risk, or whatever it's called. I don't want to, I don't want to butcher their name, but those guys over there deal just with housing data. And there's an interesting index that they have, which is deals with mortgage risk. And they also do almost the equivalent of a stress test for
Right.
banks.
Right.
And for years now, even under Trump, he never did anything to stop this, but it started under Obama. And what they were saying with this, what they would give you was a level for the index every month, and it would basically tell you the level of risk that we are in as a nation for if there was a financial or liquidity crisis. What kind of risk do we have of falling again into another financial collapse? Very interesting risk. I mean, very interesting index. And they have been, every press release that comes out with it, saying, we're at these horrible levels. If this happens, then we can end up right back where we were. And nobody paid attention. And who knows? Maybe
I think they're full of it.
You think so?
The banks are infinitely more capitalized than they were 12 to 15 years ago.
And insured.
The banks have just taken $20 billion and put it aside for loan loss provisions. When they take that money, because this is almost like what they call the kitchen sink quarter, where a company has everything bad going on. Maybe they fire the CEO, they bring in a new CEO. That new CEO wants to write off everything he can possibly write off in that quarter because it's not on him. Okay. So what he wants is he wants to make current any potential problems that the company has, put it all in that quarter, take a big write-off, show a gigantic loss, because his performance is really going to be marked from that point on. So what will happen now is, when we get a year, 2 years from now, and the banks take a good chunk of that $20 billion for loan loss reserves that they've just allocated, and they bring it back, that'll go right to the bottom line.
And by the way, while Tim was talking, we just got the Philadelphia Fed. I actually meant to look at that before. We got that at 8:30, actually, Tim. My fault. I just pulled it up. Again, consensus forecast range, -50 was the low. The high was -22. The consensus was -30. We've hit an all-time low. It is -56.6.
Right.
Look,
and the New York State number was -76.
Lowest ever.
And what I made a point of in my market comment this morning was, everybody yesterday on financial news, because they see the headlines, they see that the market's down, and they're talking about how the market sold off because of bad earnings from the banks, because retail sales was down 8%, and because industrial production was down 5.5%, the largest monthly a decline since 1946. I don't know. That was totally expected by the market. The market knew that retail sales were going to be down. Frankly, some of the estimates I was looking at had retail sales down 10 to 12%.
Yeah.
It came in at down 8.7. The market was down because it had rallied 25 to 30% off its lows. It was running into resistance levels. It was time to take a breather. And
yeah, I don't
oil
think I
at $20 is bad.
Yeah, I don't think I'm with Tim on this. I don't Markets have a lot of this baked into the cake. If in the future, what Tim was saying before, housing starts, permits, if they don't snap back, then we'll start to see movements that the market will be reacting to economic data again. I'm with Tim. I don't see that, Tim. I think everybody knew retail sales was going to be down. Everybody knew that report was going to be ugly. Everybody knew this report this morning was going to be ugly. Right. Yes, we got the manufacturing, but the Fed, even in their industrial production report, flatly said this is because firms chose to halt. I mean, this is not something that people,
this is not a structural issue.
This was not
a structural issue.
Yeah, I agree.
And the reason I think housing will come back so quickly is because 30-year mortgage rates are at 3.3%. And if there's any way that you can swing a 15-year mortgage, that's at 2.75%.
Yeah, but let me play devil's advocate here, Tim. They're going to raise their standards. If you really look around,
you can do a little bit better than 3.3. So I think even if now the bank is saying, look, we know that a year ago we were talking about maybe putting 15% down, we need 20% down. Most people are going to figure out a way to come up with that extra money because now they're talking about a mortgage at 3.3 versus 4.
I'm going to disagree with that because I think they're going to burn through it right now, Tim. I think they're going to burn through that money they had. More than 76% of the country lives mouth to mouth. I mean, we're just not going to. We'll see. We'll see. I hope Tim's right and I'm wrong, but I think that many of these people are going to lose out on that. I do. All right, let's. Oh my God, 10:37, and then because I am good. I'm dying to see this market update. When we start, Tim. We totally missed the endorsements yesterday, and then when I got off, people were like, you forgot to talk about Biden's endorsement. We briefly touched on. I'll come back. We'll talk about that.
Wasn't much of an endorsement.
We'll talk about that briefly, and then what that means, if anything, and then we'll get into North Carolina because really great discussion on social media yesterday about that poll and about North Carolina in general. So I'll tell you where we have North Carolina, and we'll go over a voter analysis. But right now it is 10:37, and you're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. You can follow me on Twitter at Peoples_Pundit. I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. Follow him, folks, on Twitter at TJ Anderson1, at TJ Anderson1. You guys are doing a great job. If you are watching on Periscope, and I can see a bunch of you are, if you're watching on Periscope, give us the hearts, follow the account, follow both of them. It runs on mine, runs on PPD. If you're watching on Facebook guys are doing great too. Like the post, like the page. Don't forget, as soon as it starts to stream, it'll alert you if you like the page. And then also the ever important subscription total on YouTube. We're trying to get to that milestone. Like it if you haven't already. Share it. Tell them to like it. And if you want to know when we go on, 10 a.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday. But if you want an alert, hit that notification bell and it will send it to you. But definitely we're trying to hit that milestone. So like subscribe to the page on YouTube. And the ultimate way to support the show is to subscribe to PPD. Can't do it without it. And it is ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. So that was our word from our sponsor. And now we're back. So let's talk about, look, with the Biden endorsement, Tim, it would have mattered when this thing was still competitive. I feel it was like really, he did this to Hillary Clinton too, very cowardly endorsement. And then he comes out like it's important when he does. Hillary Clinton had his endorsement and it did nothing for her. Endorsements matter not almost always. Now, there are certain examples like Jim Clyburn in South Carolina that, of course, matter for Biden, in South Carolina that saved him. But in the end, it doesn't do because mainly people ask me, well, will this get out the vote among African Americans? Hillary Clinton had a longer relationship with the African American community and a deeper one than Joe Biden. The only thing Joe Biden has that Hillary Clinton didn't have is that he was Barack Obama's vice president. In the end, and like I said yesterday, a lot of this is highly overrated. A presidential candidate at the top of a ticket must carry his or her own weight. If he doesn't make the necessary reach outs to these communities, they will not come out like they came out for Obama. It's just the way it is. That is true. And I will all and basically does almost nothing with those working class people. I mean that we talked about when we looked at Pennsylvania. I'm telling you that's not Biden's mark. Biden's mark is a higher African American turnout than Hillary Clinton and those suburbs that we hammered on the other day. So important. So important. That is his path to victory over Donald Trump. So I really think a lot of this is overblown, Tim. I don't think it matters. When you have those community leaders in there because you're making overtures to them and you're listening to them, then they go out and they get that vote out for you. Even in South Carolina, Tim, that wasn't I wasn't overly impressed. That's what you would have had to do if you were Joe Biden to put down Bernie Sanders. That's what he did. I mean, so yeah, I think we're giving them, like the Biden campaign, I think we're giving them a lot more credit than they deserve for finally doing what they were supposed to and expected to do anyway. And I think the bar was so low that now everybody looks at that and sees it as some like big, vast accomplishment. You know what I mean? But it's not. It was what he needed and was expected to do.
It's against everything else that they've done over the last 6 weeks.
Right.
Which is nothing.
Nothing.
But show embarrassing clips of him and have him having a online discussion with Bernie Sanders where he's reading from a teleprompter
and Bernie looks like he's gonna cry. He can feel Bernie looks like he looks like he can feel a piece of his soul slipping away. The same pain he felt at the DNC in 2016. I mean, we got the best picture of Bernie coming off of that stage after he gave his spiel to him about how it's more important to endorse, to vote for Hillary Clinton than it is to make this statement right now. The picture of him, he's going like this. He's like, yep. I can't believe I just did that. And we got the best picture of him coming off that stage. It's hilarious. That's a good question. I'll answer that now. So we got the question, do you know of any other former president trying to defeat an incumbent like this before? No. Typically, former presidents who now are, in the opposing party of an incumbent, such as George W. Bush, for instance, when he didn't help Mitt Romney like this. It's a very small, exclusive group of people, former presidents. And typically there's a certain expected decorum from them. And Obama has, George Bush afforded it to him. We're not going to see him afford that to Donald Trump. And also it'll be on a level, Tim, we've never seen before. The amount of effort that he'll try to put in to stop Trump's reelection. Typically, former presidents do the classy thing, which is what they used to call it. I don't know if you remember that, but it's a class act. He's staying out of it. So-and-so is a class act. Ronald Reagan's a class act. It's just what they used to say to refer to that. You have to win it on your own. You have to put your own record up. Yes, Ronald Reagan did he in 88, he basically threw the coin to George W. Bush and walked off the stage. In 92, he didn't even want to go to the convention. He didn't even want to.
I think he was starting to lose it in 92.
He was definitely deteriorating, but he didn't even want to go. He did because Bush was in so much trouble, but we're not talking about someone who actively really went out there and campaigned like we're going to see Obama do against Donald Trump this time. It's just an unspoken courtesy. That's the word I'm looking for. It's an unspoken courtesy among that group, and he's going to throw it out the window. It's like all the other, man, where are all these people who care about the norms, Tim? Where are they now? It's always been a joke, that line. It always has been a joke. But it's 10:45 and we blew right past the market update. Can you give us a quick
The
market
market's
update?
actually having a great day today, and if anyone's out there is looking at it, it's very much a bifurcated market. The transport average is down about 1.75%. Maybe a little bit less than right that. The Dow has been down as much as 250 points. It's down half of that right now. So the Dow is down 0.5%. The NASDAQ is close to up 1%. And the S&P 500 is up fractionally, between flat and up 0.25%. So it's the big industrial multinational names that are under pressure. And the technology names are doing very well, which is a trend we've seen now for close to 2 weeks among the NASDAQ stocks. And even in the S&P 500, the pressure seems to be off the oil stocks a little bit today. The oil sector of the S&P is split into 11 different sectors. Energy was the weakest sector yesterday. It was down 4.7%. That pressure seems to be off today. Oil is stabilizing a little bit north of $20. It needs to do a lot better than that, but at least it's not cascading much lower below 20. So right now, the S&P is in the green. The Dow is down only about 0.5%, coming well off its lows. And I just get the feeling that you're going to have the market maybe improve as the day goes on. Keep in mind that later this afternoon, we'll get updated guidance from the CDC on updated social distancing guidelines and any other updated guidance that they're going to give to lay the ground of getting people back to work. And frankly, I think we saw a little hint of that yesterday when Governor Cuomo put out an executive order saying that people need to wear masks in public areas when they're unable to conform to the social distancing guidelines. So you can read that as mass transit, for instance. Okay. Now, I do not at all view that as a draconian move by Cuomo. I view that as him starting to lay the groundwork for how we're going to adjust the guidelines for getting people back to work.
Because if you're not going to, you see that.
If you're not going to start move toward getting people back to work and having a lot more people on the subways and a lot more people taking mass transit and a lot more people congregating through crowded public areas like Grand Central Station, like the atrium at the World Trade Center, at the World Financial Center downtown, and in other congested areas, office buildings, elevators, et cetera, why bother to say that everybody needs to wear a mask if you're not able to stay 6 feet away from other people?
Right. I saw it the same way. Because he is in that group too, and just from things we've heard, the least open to getting larger sectors of the economy up and going again is Murphy. Cuomo is not, and that doesn't surprise me at all, given Cuomo's the governor of New York. They have a lot of. It's a lifeline for them. The state of New York cannot continue this much longer, and Cuomo's not an idiot. He's not really even particularly ideological.
He's a pretty smart, savvy guy. Murphy's been behind the curve the whole time. He was behind the curve in putting on stuff. He overreacted with shutting all the parks in New Jersey. And then he did an interview with Tucker Carlson last night. It was embarrassing. And, look, they need the revenue. The states need the revenue.
Yeah, even with the federal government coming in, there's not going to, I do think in the end, big government Democrats have a way of getting their way. So in the end, I think they're going to get money.
I'm sure the federal government's going to help them out, but they're not going to,
they're not going to
bail out abject stupidity.
Yeah, and
at the
multiple
state
times,
level.
and I think that's one of Trump's leverage points, Tim, is that
Right.
he'll, I will give you some assistance now, but not if
But this is what you
don't
got to,
even bother.
but these are the rules.
These are the rules, right?
Right.
And that's why, he got into it with what's her name over at what was it, CBS, and he said, I got total. They misconstrued what he meant when he said I have total authority. Now it won't come to that. They're gonna listen. That's how Trump works, and
Right.
that's what he meant. He meant that he will give these people money with under certain conditions,
Sure, of
and there
course.
will be preconditions.
Right.
And that's it. And they can, even if they expect or think that he will be defeated in November, those will still have those conditions. I fully expect that. That's how Donald Trump operates. There's no
Right.
reason to suggest, there's no reason to think now anyway, anything different. And so, yeah, to circle back, because I did miss somebody's thing. Why is Obama doing it? I think there's a few reasons why Obama is working to defeat Donald Trump, Tim. And I don't want to take too much time. We already went over this, but a few reasons. One, he doesn't like the guy. Two, legacy. And three, he has to. This is not talked about often, and definitely not often enough. They have to get rid of Donald Trump. They have to get rid of him. If he is allowed to stay for a second term, there will be certain reckonings that they can still manage to skirt if he is defeated and is ousted by next January. If he is still in that office for another 4 years, Obama's legacy is not going to look very pretty when this is all done and over with. Obama is somebody, whether you like Barack Obama or not, you're just going to have to eat what I'm saying right now. It's because it's true. Obama is somebody who didn't hesitate for a second to use the levers of government at a level we've never seen before to punish people and hurt people and persecute, even persecute is the word, on a level we have never seen in this country before. We had certain instances, we don't talk about it often, but FDR, he used his Treasury guy to go after political opponents. JFK used the IRS too once before, so did Nixon. But we have never seen anything like what we have seen with Barack Obama. The IRS thing was nothing, Tim. That was nothing compared to taking the CIA, the FBI, the DNI, and turning it on political opponents. We have never seen anything like that in the history of the country before. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care if you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're an independent. If you don't realize how dangerous, and that has always been, every troll on Twitter since the start of that Russia thing, who, you're just supporting Trump. Oh, you're willing to support it. This to me was never about Donald Trump. If they can do this to Donald Trump, they can do this to you. They can do this to me. And that has always been what that was about for me. And in fact, I'll just clue everybody in. They have been for a very long time. We just now found out about it because they did it to Donald Trump. I have spoken with companies who work with the FBI and the Department of Defense, who have intellectual property. These lawsuits are all kept under wraps. The FBI improperly used FISA to spy on companies they were supposed to be partnering with to take intellectual property that they just didn't want to pay for, and they wanted to use it for defense. They have been doing this for a long time, and that, by the way, is not just that specific instance. Horowitz's review, in fact, found that it wasn't just Trump. It was almost everybody, almost everyone. And it, for me, was never about Donald Trump. It was just a level of concern that they would even dare to try that against a political campaign. And they did. But why was anybody surprised? John Brennan, we're talking about a low-level turd. I don't know. I'm trying to find nice words because I want this show to be I want this to be a family show. We are talking about a man of such low character. He spied on senators. He broke into an office that was for Senate investigators who were investigating the CIA and went through Dan's computer, Tim, to find. Dan was leading that investigation. They went through his computer to find incriminating evidence to get that information shut down. They barged into a Senate high level security. This is the kind of man we're talking about. And yeah, that's another great point. I just saw, I try to follow what you guys are saying. Also, this is why this whole spiel, this whole level, this argument against Donald Trump being a risk to the Second Amendment, he's the most dangerous president to journalists ever. Donald Trump has not wiretapped the AP. Donald Trump didn't go after James Rosen and his parents, his elderly parents. I mean, they are such a joke. Every time I hear them, caution against Donald Trump being such a danger to the free press, that is such a baloney. Donald Trump never used the intelligence community to go after journalists. He never used it to go after his political opposition. All right? This idea with like the Ukraine, that was a total farce. Even if he did, Tim, ask the Ukrainian president to investigate Joe Biden, that is not even close to having the CIA, who's not supposed to operate against domestic targets at all, having the CIA, the FBI, the DNI to a point, and I think we're all going to learn this soon, where even James Clapper, all right, but I don't think we're going to learn it soon. I know, all right? The reason why I was ahead of this is because I know. I just don't like, one, blowing people up, and two, getting ahead of a story because it's just not my wheelhouse. That's not what I do for a living. But people do talk to me like I'm Barbara Walters. I know it. You're going to find out that even James Clapper thought this was over the line. All right? So what John Brennan and James Comey were up to was way beyond the pale. So there's that. Okay? And I don't know. It's legacy. So how I got into this is that Donald Trump is a real threat to a lot of people in that town. And that has always been the reason why they didn't want him there. You can't run for president unless you're in the club, unless you're going to play ball. The Oval Office is the center of the information universe. There is nobody who gets more information in real time and more of it than a president and the people around him. They cannot have somebody that is not in the club, or worse, somebody who was in the club. And this is how they view Donald Trump. Somebody who was in the club, who is a person the system was built to help, flip off the system and then decide he's going to work against it. That's even worse, by the way, than somebody who was just never in the club. He was in the club. Their whole system was built to was designed to benefit him. And they feel like, the system feels like he betrayed them for you, which is worse. So whether you agree with the man or not, you better understand that is 100% true. You know who put it better than anybody, Tim, I've ever heard? Don King. Don King put it better than anybody, which is so weird. He's got a propensity, he's got a talent, he's got the gift of gab. So maybe I shouldn't be all that surprised. But Don King basically leveled this the best I've ever heard. It's so true that the system views Donald Trump as a traitor, and he's a threat to them, and he's got to go. So you're going to see Obama work his little tushy off like you haven't seen him before to try to get that man out of there, because all he has left is legacy. That's all he has left, and is good. He is still widely liked, Tim. Whether people who don't like Obama want to believe it or not, it isn't at all uncommon for prior presidents to get a better image than when they were in office. And people like Obama. They like his style anyway. Cool Obama.
Half to 2/3 of his legacy is probably already destroyed.
Yeah. So it's like what little he's got left. And he certainly doesn't want to be known as the president who weaponized the intelligence community against another president. He just doesn't want it. That's right. Would you? That's that's horrific. And so 11 o'clock.
I'm sure you've heard the joke, right? Obama was seen at a Subaru dealership last weekend.
No, I haven't.
He was shopping for a new legacy.
Oh no, I haven't heard that. I haven't. But God, that's funny. Oh wow, because it's the funniest jokes are the ones that are true, right. which is why comedy has taken such a dive under the era of Trump. I mean, they just have lost it to the point where you should pick on him. You should pick on every leader. That's what comedy's about. But at least make it true. You know, I was like flipping on Netflix the other day. A couple other wasn't the other day. It was a while back, but they had those specials, Tim, and
Yeah.
they had I forgot his name. Is an Asian guy, but he had a Netflix special. He spent 20 minutes almost on of his routine on the hoax of very fine people. I mean, it was just, and there
Right.
were people in the crowd who clearly didn't like it. They knew it wasn't true, but he was convinced Donald Trump called Nazis, called Nazis and white supremacists very fine people. He was
Right.
just ridiculous.
Right.
But it's 11 o'clock. Let's do a little quick word and a little quick market, and then we're going to get into North Carolina, which, like I said, polling has really kind of, the way people have released polls has really given me a nice way to jump from one state to the other. But again, guys, if you're watching on Periscope, give us the hearts, give us hearts, like us on, or follow us on Periscope and whatever account or both. If you watch on YouTube, you guys are doing a great job. Just don't forget to like the page. It will let you know when we go live. And then also on YouTube, YouTube is probably the most important because, there are milestones. And when we started this from the ground up and we got a nice little run there, let's keep it going and hit that next milestone. So subscribe to People's Pundit Daily's YouTube channel. And also, if you want to know on YouTube when we go live, you can hit that notification bell and it will send it to you. I mean, somebody else told me the other day, Tim, that they just liked the page and they were told when we went live. So maybe, but whatever. If you see the bell, hit the bell. And the important thing is you subscribe. All right. And then the ultimate way to support the show, of course, is to subscribe to People's Pundit Daily. There are monthly commitments, annual, and then credit-based, which makes it very easy. So ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. Get some data for your dollar. All right, Tim, tell us what's going on in the markets out there
The
right now.
market's having a very constructive day. There was a wave of selling right after the 9:30 opening. We bottomed out at around 10:15. And since then, the market's just been grinding higher in what I think it could be a very constructive day if it can build on the momentum that we've seen in the last 45 minutes. The Dow's down less than 100 points. The NASDAQ is up 1.25%, back up above its 200-day moving average. The S&P 500 is up close to 0.5%. It was much lower earlier in the day. And I think the reason that this would be such a constructive day, if the market can build on this, is that the economic data today is no better than it was yesterday. There's more rounds of big announced layoffs from some large companies. The first-time unemployment claims, 5 million, a huge number, even beyond what consensus was. And other economic data is clearly very bleak, but it's all in the market. The market is basically trading off of technicals, any projections that people have for the broad economy for the remainder of the year, and any estimates that people have for corporate earnings for Q1, Q2, or frankly, even the rest of the year 2000, might as well just be tossed out the window. The market's trading off, really, I think, three things. Technicals, it's trading off what I call geoeconomic events, primarily right now the price of oil. Oil's up about 40%, which is only about oil's up 4%. That's really only a move of about $1. But it really needs a lot more than that to gain some traction. And also, it's trading off news on the virus.
We wouldn't
So,
see these bounce back folks if it was trading on economic data alone. I
right,
mean, so
exactly.
that's what people are missing. And I heard that, Tim, on the way into the office today. I heard that, well, the markets are down because of jobless claims. I mean, they're not loving it, but a lot of this, I agree with Tim that a lot of that is already baked in. And yes, he meant 2020, not 2000. But just to, you said
Right.
2000 for the rest of the year, obviously he meant 2020.
2020. Right.
But yeah, I mean, if it was just solely economic data, folks, I mean, the data is bad. We would not be seeing bounce backs. Even with people trying to find good old bargain buys, we would not see that quick. We see these kind of wild gyrations. More, if anything, we see temporary impacts. But in the end, people have their footing. They knew that in the final week of March. We knew we were looking at tens of millions of people unemployed. Which not to dismiss it at all, because if you were watching in the first hour, in the beginning of the show, in the first half hour specifically, I don't like this. And I think it's, I'm in the economic suicide club. No, I'm against the economic suicide club. I think we should move sooner rather than later. At this point, my own personal opinion is that the economy could wind up taking it's not even close anymore, far more people than the coronavirus ever could. And don't you find it interesting, Tim, that the IHME revised now after Trump said the other day, I think we're looking at an opening sooner than that date, meaning he meant May 1st, sooner than May 1st, that some of us may be able to get back to work. The very next day, they increased their numbers from 61 to 68,000.
Well,
I mean,
we had the two largest days of deaths nationally back to back, yesterday and the day before. Now, despite that, Cuomo said yesterday that the worst is behind us.
Right. Clearly, and that's how modeling works.
The death count is going to trail the infection rate and hospitalizations.
That's right.
So I'm sure that IHME count was based on having two very large back-to-back days for deaths.
Which would just be, though, a testament to how faulty their model has been from the beginning, though, Tim. Because of course, if you go back and look at their update, they write their own comments when they do these updates. They have always said that, so it shouldn't surprise them. Is my point. It shouldn't surprise. Same thing. A lot of this is really akin to what we do with election modeling, right?
Right.
If you have a fundamentally sound model, then your modeling should not be wildly gyrating with the polls. Polls, especially early polls, and you should know what those polls are going to.
But this is really a first-time model made from scratch,
right?
So clearly, it was a model that was going to have,
but Imperial College,
extremely large margins of error.
But they're not the only ones. And the Imperial College model did have a track record, Tim, and it was bad. And that has always been the criticism from people like me from the jump. These people don't know what they're doing. They pretend that they know what they're doing. Their assumptions were always wrong. And this idea, somebody tweeted me before when I mentioned about the revisions, and they said, well, that was with social distancing and mitigation. And now, we're seeing more. No, it wasn't. The modeling without mitigation was 2.4 million to almost around 2. They had a range. The high end was about 2.4, 2.5 million or something like that. With social distancing, it was 100,000 to 240,000. This idea, the social distancing, that dog won't hunt. Not with me. That was always true. You can't measure it. You don't know how to measure it. And if you read their own justifications for why how they decided to measure it, they looked at prior countries and when they implemented these orders. Even now, there have been multiple reviews about when California issued their order, when New York issued their order. I did a brief little analysis of it myself. The orders they cannot explain this. I mean, I'm not going to get into, because it's 11:10. I want to get into North Carolina. Maybe I will, though. Maybe we will tomorrow. The dates of the orders they don't match up. When you look at their own justifications, China issued a lockdown here, and then this many infections went down. Ours don't match, folks. And that was always my beef. They don't match. They were making it up as they went along. That's it. All right, let's get into North Carolina. So, Tim, yesterday, I believe yesterday, Civitas comes out with a poll in North Carolina, surprised a lot of people. Donald Trump had he had a nice lead, a 7-point lead over Biden. He's almost just below 50%. So 49-42 is what it was. All right. Let me just say this. North Carolina is a state that Democrats very much want to turn into Virginia. Okay. And they're trying to use various ways to do that. Migration, immigration, same playbook for Virginia, but it's fallen short. Obama barely won it in 2018. He won it just by a few, I think it was a few hundred votes or something.
2012.
20 lost it in 2012 to Mitt
He
Romney.
lost it in 2012. So you
Yeah.
said 2018. You mean
2008. Yeah, 2008. Yeah. He won it against John McCain in a landslide election for Democrats because of the economic disaster and because of the Iraq War. I mean, all of that was on the table. However, there was a very fascinating university of I don't know if Raleigh did it. Somebody did it though. Maybe George Mason or something like that.
Well, keep in mind he won Indiana also in 2008.
Right. And they didn't look at Indiana. That would be an interesting. But that goes back to what I was talking about when we looked at Pennsylvania the other day. Obama did better with white working class voters than exit polls ever gave him credit for. I'm telling you that. I'll argue that till the cows come home. I'm right about that. The same thing with Pennsylvania. That's how he was able to widen out his margin in Michigan. That's how he was able to win Iowa twice. But he ended up beating John McCain by a few hundred votes or something, a couple thousand maybe. And George Mason went back. I think it was George Mason went back and said and basically attributed it all to illegal immigrants voting on the rolls when they weren't supposed to. Like it absolutely was. He actually McCain would have squeaked it out by a couple thousand, I think they said. But anyway, interesting study. So then Mitt Romney runs against him, targets that state pretty heavily, along with Virginia, and he carries North Carolina by just under 3 points, I believe, around 3 points. Donald Trump comes in, and our polling was pretty interesting in North Carolina. It actually tightened for Hillary. It was one of the other ones, totally reversed from some of the other stuff that we polled, most of the other states. It reversed. It was about +7. I think the high was 7, Tim, with our polling in North Carolina. I could bring that up and look. And then we had it was like +3 or +4 in our final. I'm going to actually look and take a look right now. But in any event, Trump wound up winning it by nearly 4 points, a little at 3.5 or something like that. And here, I can actually pull it up and see. Yeah, so here's North Carolina. We had it. Our very, very final was one of interesting. It was, you know how we showed tens of percentage points the other day?
Yep.
North Carolina and Ohio were two states that actually fell dead on the 0 tenth, so a whole number. And it was 49-46 for Trump. So our final was +3 for Trump. The RCP average was Trump +1. He won it by 3.7, and it was so nearly a 4-point margin. All right. This Civitas poll has Trump up by 7. We don't, even though it will be close in terms of actual numbers, the percentage, we don't view North Carolina yet as competitive. It would have to be one of those states. I mean, it's competitive. I don't want to say that. It is competitive, but there's a decided edge there for Donald Trump, and we're going to show you why. All right. I would say it's a pink state. It isn't a red state. Democrats can win it. Look at Cooper. We have talked to a lot of Republican voters who voted for Cooper over McCrory for specific reasons. So it isn't impossible for a Democrat at all to win statewide. In 2014, Tom Tillis defeated Kay Hagan by about 2 points, a little under 2 points. She just didn't get it to 59, 60% in Wayne County back then. That is what needed to be done if you were a Democrat in Wayne County to win the state of North Carolina. And of course, you just couldn't get murdered in other parts of the state. But I'm looking to see what our high was. Our high in North Carolina for Trump actually was only +5. It was 49-44, very close to the Civitas poll. And then in the end,
Rich, I'll be right back.
Okay. And then in the end, it was Trump +3. Interesting thing about North Carolina, which people have really got to understand. So somebody tells me PPP as Biden up by 1. That's very common, and PPP is I would look, like I said, I'm not going to get in the habit of criticizing other pollsters here, but PPP does not have a great track record. They are run by liberals. I don't know how they do it now. I haven't looked into their polls as of recently, but they were almost exclusively robo polling. And if you watch the show or you follow me on Twitter, you know that respondents different. It's not just that you will reach different people at a different rate depending on how you're trying to poll, whether you're live calling to a mobile phone, whether you're robo polling or using IVR, it's called interactive voice response, whether you're using interactive voice response to reach a landline, because you can't do that with cell phones. You can't use IVR. You have to have a live interviewer. Or now, whether you're using SMS to cell phones, which is a text message to a cell phone holder, who, when they can either take the survey directly in their text message, or they click more often on a link that brings them to the same kind of software that is being used to handle an online panel. All right. And then, of course, there's an online panel, which, as you know, all of ours in 2016 were online panels. We didn't even use phone polling for the modeling that we had in 2016. That was all online panel. And there was a reason for that, by the way. We wanted to run an experiment. We wanted to do something different. And we got creamed for it. We got called all sorts of names. We got creamed for it, by people who should not be authorities on polling, by the way. They're nothing but poll readers. All right. But in any event, we can actually prove that the online panel was more likely to vote than any other mode. So it's not just that you'll reach these people at different rates on different modes, but people respond at different rates on different modes. So liberals, gentrified liberals, for instance, are much more likely to talk to somebody who's a live caller when you call them on their cell phone than a suburban or rural conservative voter. They don't like it. They don't want you to call them on their cell phones. They just don't like it. They are more likely to pick up the phone and talk to an interactive voice response. If you don't have a person on the other end of the line, they are more likely to speak to you than they would if a live caller was conducting a live interview. And we know this from response rates and people just picking up and hanging up or abandoning the survey. All right. So with those people, we specifically give them anonymity, and we tell them we're giving them anonymity. And we use great text-to-speech tool, by the way. Amazon helped develop an amazing text-to-speech tool. It's based on Poly, if people who know Amazon Poly. And they are fantastic. I mean, just fantastic. It sounds perfect. It doesn't even sound like a robo person. But we tell them that this is a interactive voice response, that nobody is on the other line listening. You have anonymity. You can be honest. It's okay. And then when we get to demographics, we specifically tell them that that we can't collect your responses without you giving answers to these demographics, personal questions. But remember, all of your responses are anonymous. The answers we receive and collect are confidential. And then we give them, so we reassure them right before demographic questions that is some of the things that we have developed to employ to keep those response rates higher. And we know certain people are more likely to respond and complete a survey depending on how you try to collect that survey, the actual data collection mode. So it's not surprising to see they got something in North Carolina and Biden's up by 1. I'm going to go ahead and tell you why that's just not likely. Okay, let's get into the voter file. And I'm going to show you where pollsters, a lot of them, go wrong when they poll North Carolina. Okay. And sometimes my better half is always like, you give away too many secrets. You shouldn't be telling people this stuff. Well, that's the point of what I do. I'm not going to give away everything, but I'm going to tell people, because I think that unless we get more open and honest with how things are done in this industry, we're simply never going to win back the public trust. It's not going to happen. And this is an era where there's more information, a lot of interest in this field, and people should know the dirty little secrets that people have been, keeping from them for a long time. I think after 2016, Tim, And then again in 2018, the national polls were better, but the state polls were horrible. They were terrible. If you looked at the gubernatorial races, if you look at the Senate races, some of them were terrible, and they just continue on like there's nothing wrong with how they're doing things. Fox News, by the way, so I don't want to hear liberals, with their, you're just going after media polls because you don't believe them. I never dismiss any polls ever, not, unless it's somebody I know I cannot rely on. But as far as big media polls go, I don't dismiss them. I tend to look at how they collect their data and then what that might mean. Fox News relies heavily on, collecting from metro areas and urban areas. That's it. And if you look at their national polling, it wasn't horrible in 2018, but their state polling was abysmal. If Fox News was right, Joe Donnelly would still be the senator of Indiana, right, Tim? If Fox News,
they had him +7.
If Fox, that's right.
And what was the final in that? I think he lost it by 8.
It was a 16-point miss or something, or it was horrible. It was a horrible miss, and it was so close to the election.
They had the Missouri race. They had the Missouri race, way off also.
Yeah, well, that's what. Missouri was, or Missouri. Sorry,
and what is not
that
supposed
was
to
tied,
be,
or McCaskill.
Right, not supposed to be a difficult state to poll, from what I've heard. But
because
Indiana has a reputation of being difficult.
It is, and because they have strict laws with what I was talking about before too, with interactive voice response, there are certain laws. So does Michigan, by the way. There are states out there that make themselves difficult to poll. Alaska is very hard and always has been, even before.
Well, that's understandable.
Unbelievably hard.
Yeah.
But a place like Indiana makes it more difficult with their restrictions because you're going to have, and Missouri the same way, you're going to have a lot of those voters, Tim, who don't want to talk to a pollster the way Fox News polls, and you're simply going to miss them. Again, Florida, I could go down the list. Georgia, some of them were pretty accurate, but the Atlanta Constitutional Journal is a horrible poll, has always been a horrible poll. I mean, I'm not saying they're not doing something, they're doing something ethically wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying some pollsters refuse to evolve, and if they did, it would mean less money for them. So this is something else I should get into too. Polling live samples, live interviewer polling is very expensive, extremely expensive. It could be 3 to 5 times more on average at any given poll, depending on your project, more expensive than an online panel poll, and even more expensive than interactive voice response, which can be much cheaper. They don't want to evolve. They have a financial incentive not to evolve. To evolve. All right. So, the odds of you being contacted by a pollster are actually pretty low. With ours, you'd have to be in the voter file, which, to answer one of the questions, I'll show you right now. So let's look at North Carolina, and then that will help explain some of what somebody's talking about. So here we go with as you can see here, it's North Carolina. Little over about 6.3 million in the voter file, which the totality of this voter file is now about 150 million. That is nationally, I mean. And then broken down by state, we have North Carolina, it's 6.3. And I can actually even show you guys, because this will help answer somebody's question. So landline, email, and then mobiles are over here. Let me run the count again, Tim, just to show them. So when we poll, we would generate a list out of this, and we would tell it, do we want landline records, mobile records, email records? I always pull them all. I pull them all. So that means, as you can see, there are more mobiles, 2.4 million, than there are landlines, 1.7. That shouldn't surprise anybody. There are 2.4 millions for online panels, and we have partners. We have the biggest panel partner in the world as our partner, but when we build our own panels, we take these email lists, and then you will get an email introducing you to us, asking if you want to participate in a panel poll, meaning you will get surveys once in a while. We don't incentivize people with money. And the reason why we don't is we don't want to end up where YouGov ended up in 2016, where you're incentivizing younger people to take surveys so that maybe they can get a gift card to Kohl's or something. All you will get in that sample is a 20-year-old girl who really isn't going to go out and vote, a 20-year-old young woman who isn't going to go out and vote him. She just wants to earn points so she can get a $30 rod, Coles. I'm serious. I'm not kidding. Or whatever it may be. I'm using that as an excuse. It could be a guy who, okay, ladies, it could be a guy who wants to get a new headset or something. So he's taking these to get a gift card or whatever it may be. We don't incentivize like that. We will give panels a list. We like SurveyMonkey. I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you. After 2016, we got this idea from SurveyMonkey. We like the idea of letting people take surveys. They, depending on how long it is, you will get anywhere from like $1 to $3, sometimes as low as 50 cents if it's small, toward a charity of your choice. You will be able to pick which charity that is, whether, St. Jude's, Shriners, whatever. There are tons of them. Everything from left-wing causes, environmental causes, to right-wing groups, which we're going to add, such as Samaritan's Purse will be the next one we add. All right. That's run by Graham, the Reverend Graham. And they're helping right now with coronavirus, which is why we decided, and I personally have donated to them before. This is why we have decided to add them. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. But we offer a wide range of groups from left to right, and then they get to tally that up. And at the end of the month, those responses get sent to whichever groups were chosen. All right. We like that because it promotes basically, what's the word I'm looking for? Civic duty, right? It promotes that just like voting does. So if you have a person who's very likely to do that, it means they have a higher civic, sense of civic duty, and that's means they're more likely to vote. All right. That's the idea behind it. If you incentivize them, it simply means you're going to get people who are looking for something to earn points or money for something, and they're not going to vote. Focus groups have to be paid. They are very expensive. So that's something totally different. But anyway, as you can see here, landlines, emails, mobiles, and this would have came up on the analysis. No voter propensity score. This is the entire voter file in North Carolina, which is dirty. Just like I said with Pennsylvania, North Carolina is dirty. Republicans did try when they had the governor's mansion and the legislature. If you remember the fight over voter ID in North Carolina, you're going to see why in a second. Okay. It is a dirty roll, but this is also part of the reason why pollsters get North Carolina wrong. It doesn't there are certain states where voter registration and self-identification do not match up at all. Self-identification is when you call somebody and you ask them whether they consider themselves to be a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or something else. That is how our question is worded. In North Carolina, there are a ton of Democrats who will tell you they are a Democrat. They are a Republican. Again, Democrats who will tell you, because you pulled it from this list and you know what they are, what they're registered as, yet they will tell you they are a Republican. And what happens to some of these, especially inexperienced pollsters, they look at this breakdown, they go to the registration, whatever it is that they're using to guide them, and they think, oh, Democrat +7, Democrat +8. So when they get their responses back, which are more often than not these days, the polling methods themselves tend to favor reaching more moderate and liberal voters than conservative voters or conservative-leaning moderates, all right? And they think that that's an affirmation of the data they collected, but it's not. What they really have here is a form of response bias built in with an incorrect assessment of how voters view themselves, okay? And if we look at, maybe I'll pull it up in a second, but if you look at what we had as a party breakdown, Tim, in North Carolina, we had it 33% Republican, 37% Democrat, 30% independent. The exit polls, which I'll show people, was 35% Democrat, 31% Republican, and 33% independent. What happens here? Well, two things happen. The exit polls showed Trump getting only 8% of the Democratic vote. That didn't happen, and I'm almost sure that it was closer, because when we had 2% still undecided, it was probably closer to 9 or 10%. But if you were watching the other day, you know that every little bit matters when we're talking about Pennsylvania. The difference between 11 or 13% crossover is huge. Okay. It's just, you don't, the people who don't do it don't realize it until you try to actually weight it and calculate and see how much it changes. So the electorate was D+4 in 2016. And here we have a total, basically of, well, actually, if you round up, Tim, it's D+7 if you round up. Let's do the voter propensity score like we always do. And let me show you what happens when you look at just voters who are 50% likely to vote. And this does factor in for some of that dirt that I was talking about, because there are people on the rolls that they haven't voted because they shouldn't be on the rolls. And some, yes, I'm sure that vote and shouldn't. All right, here we go. Much closer to an actual electorate in North Carolina. 38% Democrat, rounded down. 34% Republican, rounded up. So now we're to D+5. Still a very large chunk of independents or nones. Donald Trump won that group in 2016, 53-37. Romney beat Obama pretty bad there as well. They are swingy, but they're really not that swingy. So how do Republicans keep the state of North Carolina, even though they have this deficit? It's the same way Democrats keep New Hampshire, even though they have actually a bigger deficit. Sometimes I'll have to look and see now. It's probably closer to like R+3 now, but the same way they win the independent vote substantially. And because they have made self-identification gains there. So they do better among the opposing party's base than the opposing party does among their base. So you guys can get a better idea of what a real electorate looks like in North Carolina. There are some two areas I want to talk about too, Tim, because when we talked about Pennsylvania the other day, I brought it up, the special election, if you remember.
Right.
Yeah, that is
with the one with Connor Lamb and
right. Well, I brought up the Connor Lamb one, but
right.
then I that's what kind of segmented me over into the two in North Carolina, which really shows how people, how this idea that if Republicans were losing all suburbia, then we would not have seen such a stable vote in the district, in the other district. We only cared about that one because it had a more competitive election, and because he was such a strong candidate. The Democratic candidate was very strong, and he was running against somebody
in North Carolina, in that the coastal district, but
that's
the district outside of Charlotte.
And we're going to look at that coastal district because for two reasons. One, that's going to be mine. All right. And two, it makes my point. If Republicans were losing just across the board in these areas, Tim, we would have saw that other district go down as well. We would, but we saw it was R30 in 2016. It was R30 in the special election. And the reason why is because more affluent suburbs in and around Moorhead, in downtown area of New Bern, they didn't move toward Democrats like you keep hearing everybody talk. It is because they're less metro, by the way. They are affluent and suburban, but they're less metro. That's number one. And number two, there was again, I can't stress enough, Democrats poured a ton of money into that district and they had a great candidate. All right.
Yep.
So, all right. You know what, though? It is 10:33. Let's get the spiel out of the way, and then we'll jump right back in. You can see, guys, where I'm going right here. That special election that Tim was just talking about, the one was over here in and around this coastal area, the Neuse River. It carries New Bern, Moorhead City, and then the other one was in backed up against Cumberland. Okay. So, and then Cumberland, Hoke, and Richmond. All right. But we'll do that on the flip side, Tim. Okay. So we'll get this out of the way. We'll do a market break because it's already 11:33, and then we'll run into where Biden would have to, be running up these margins. And frankly, we just don't see it. But okay, so you guys are watching. It is 11:33 Thursday, April 16th. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. You can follow me on Twitter at Peoples_Pundit right there. And I'm joined by Tim Anderson at TJ Anderson1. Tim, the source, Anderson and Wall Street Trader at TJ Anderson1. He's going to give us a quick market update, and then we're going to jump right into North Carolina, folks. All right. I'll be back on the flip side.
So we've got quite a bit of divergence in the market today. The Dow and the transports are down. The NASDAQ and the S&P 500 are up. NASDAQ's having a very good day. It's up over 1%. The S&P is up maybe about 0.5%. The Dow has been bouncing around all over the place. Right now, it's down 0.5%. Most of the selling in the market is highly concentrated in big industrial names, some financials, and of course the airlines. So clearly, the sectors that are going to have the most difficulty getting back to business levels that they were at before all of this started. Oil is doing a little bit better today. I had botched it earlier when I said it was up 4%. Oil is up a little. It's up about a little over 1%, holding that $20 level. It needs to do a lot better than that if a lot of the small independent fracking and shale companies are going to survive this shakeout. The only way oil really is going to do a lot better is when the economy starts to kick into gear. We start to be ramped up. We get a lot more people back at work. We get a lot more people driving on the roads. We get the airplanes back in the air, and also the other global economies start to get back in business also.
I turned my mic off for a second there.
Oh,
yeah, right. I didn't even notice that with oil until it was like 5 minutes after the segment. But
no, I knew it as soon as I said it and you were talking, and I thought it wasn't even worth correcting.
But I totally agree. Until there's demand, we're just not going to see that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, production cuts. I mean, we could have another round of if we had another round of production cuts. It's not going to take the oversupply off the market until we have demand back. It's not going to get immediately back to where it was, but we got to get it back off zero.
Right. I will try to answer a lot of questions while we were going on about North Carolina. And a great observation from Brian, the 45 and older crowd that are registered Democrat but vote Republican on the presidential level absolutely did. He's totally right. Absolutely backed Cooper. So he's actually doing pretty well over there, despite what the headlines have been the last couple of weeks, with him. But he's doing well because he's doing well among those older Republicans. And again, in those polls, if they didn't look into the voter file itself, they may not know that those people are really Democrats, but they're calling themselves Republicans. It used to be that Democrats had several 100,000 advantage over there, Tim. It was big. It was like 43-32. It was big. And still, it was a generally red state because of what I'm telling people about. Since Republicans have done a very good job getting some of those voters to switch over, but we haven't seen it really come to equilibrium where it really should at this point. And another thing that I forgot to mention before is how consolidated Republicans on the presidential level are. They break off for like a gubernatorial. There'll be a large chunk of like 20-25% Republicans who will vote for somebody like a Cooper. All right. But that doesn't happen on the presidential level. Donald Trump lost like 2 to 4%. It's estimated in North Carolina, only 2 to 4% of his own base voted for Hillary Clinton. That's it.
It's always easier to get those Republicans to break off and vote for a Democratic governor than it is a Democratic senator, because the governors run on more local and state issues, whereas the senators it becomes an ideological vote.
I could not agree with that more. Tip O'Neill was right when he said all politics is local. And really, no more so do you see that than in gubernatorial races. No more so. So here's the breakdown of the map, all right, where people are, Tim. And again, here's an actual, like closer to an actual electorate, all right? And you can see that Democrats do have a registration edge. It's about 90,000 and change, all right? But it used to be large. Wait, and we were talking about hundreds of thousands. Close to. I think when Romney ran, it was close to still around 200,000, maybe more. So and then what happens again is that those independents, while they have been getting more liberal, or at least that was the trend leading up until 2016, they had been getting more liberal. They went for Donald Trump big. I mean, almost 20 points. It was 16 points in 2016. And so we have this area over here, Wayne County. I said before, Kay Hagan lost to Tom Tillis because she couldn't get this vote up right here. If she would have got just a few more percentage points out of Wayne County, she would have, at least fought it to a draw, Tim. But she didn't, and she fell short. I think in the end, it was like 56.5 or maybe 57.5, something like that. And Democrats now do better there, but it's not enough to overcome everywhere else, and it's not enough to overcome losing 1 out of 10 of your own voters. 1 out of 10 right here, folks, is how much? Do the math in your head real quick. It's about the difference between the Republican and the Democratic electorate. And if Democrats are only losing about 2% of that, if Democrats are only winning about 2% to 4%, even 5%, if it's single digits and they can't, offset the loss to their own party, then when they lose this group right here, it's going to be ugly. Look at where they are. They're everywhere. And by the way, they made no gains with these people over here. They made no gains, which you would think, Tim, right? Given the media narrative, you would think these coastal, affluent, rich Republicans would be Joe Biden supporters. They're not. They're not. They didn't vote a single point more Republican. A single point more Democrat in 2018. There was no movement here. Now, we saw more movement in Cumberland for two reasons. This is a more metro area. It is. You have Fayette. Look, it's Fayette-Nam, we used to call it in the Army, Tim. Fayette-Nam. That's what we called it in the Army. This is very different than over here. And by the way, big military constituency also, Tim. And Democrats ran a former Marine, I think, or something. He was a veteran. He was a very strong candidate. He spoke very moderately on abortion, guns, healthcare.
He was as good as they were going to get.
He was a great candidate. And I could have saw Bishop losing that race because he was an evangelical. A lot of people were,
I think that going down into the wire, that was a 50-50 shot at best for the Republican.
Absolutely. And what happened in the special election is that they won about 5,000 votes more than they won in 2018 on election day. And for those of you who don't know what happened, this frustrates Republicans because Democrats do it everywhere. So it's legal to ballot harvest in California. It is not legal in North Carolina. You cannot submit absentee ballots after election day. All right. But there was absentee ballot fraud. They got a federal court to stay the results. And the Republicans had maybe a few hundred vote lead going out of election day on 2018. And, the courts eventually said, or it wasn't federal, I think it was a state, eventually said, you got to redo this election. This is a provable case of voter fraud. You have to redo this election. Republicans dumped their candidate, who was essentially, at that time found completely guilty of it. He was convicted in the court of public opinion. He was toxic, Tim, toxic. Right. And they dumped him, and they got a evangelical preacher to take his place to run in a fairly moderate area, which has been, yes, a Republican area, but it was a moderate Republican area. Just like Steve King's area is Pete King in New York, just like his area is a Republican district. It's still a moderate district, and the power of the incumbency matters. This was an area where Republicans got hammered with retirements, and we're seeing that again this year, and their bench isn't that good. That's a cause of concern for them. But Democrats threw the kitchen sink at this race, and they had a fantastic candidate. And for their money, what they got was about 5,000 less in the margin, and nothing. Again,
What was that
no
finally? They lost
movement.
by like 2%.
Yeah, it was close. It was
Yeah.
close. It was like 2%, but
Yeah.
it was but that,
But
that
it
came.
wasn't recount close. It
Yeah,
was
no, it wasn't recount close, and it
you
was a
know.
loss.
Yeah.
It was a loss, and Republicans were, doing cartwheels because they won. Like I said, I mean, as far as the number of votes, they won about 5,000 more in the margin, in the total, difference in the margin.
Right. Right. Right.
And if you look at that area, if you look at that congressional district, the bottom line is Republicans always had more voters on the table, left on the table, than Democrats did. Democrats did a great job getting their vote out there, but they simply didn't have the pool of voters to tap than the Republicans did. And when they, you barrage the news with that kind of coverage, Tim, it's not, a way to get your voter base to the poll. It's just not. I mean, in the end, as Mecklenburg and everything, I mean, all of that really, saves. It's just, again, I'm looking at the teal, aqua, whatever you want to call it, because when you overlay this map with not just Trump's, but even Romney's presidential vote, some of it came from different areas. Trump just absolutely ran it up in some of these areas, and that was able to offset some of the, he didn't do as well in and around some of these other areas. So it was almost natural to see that race get competitive, Tim, but then they threw so much money at it and they had a great candidate. So it was like one of those times where you could really make a go of it. But in the end, it just wasn't it. And when we get to the statewide race, what I'm trying to get people to understand, and this is the most important thing I could tell people about this in North Carolina, is you really have to look at the polling. You have to look, it's not just the party breakdown for the usual reason people say. Do you think that the pollster understands who really is and who really isn't a partisan, and whether or not those voters are truly partisan voters that you can count on? So if the poll shows that Donald Trump is winning like 3% of Democrats in the state of North Carolina or something ridiculous, it's not right. It's not right. Something's wrong there. All right. And if is the pollster getting that, collecting that, and then putting it up against the registration or the voter file and then saying, well, it's D+7 and Trump's only winning 2 or 3% of them. So, even though he's carrying independents by a little bit, he must be losing. And then you come up with a Biden +1 or worse. And there will be worse. There were Clinton +6s in 2016 in North Carolina. You remember that, Tim?
Yes.
There were Clinton +6s. The New York Times, he who will not be spoken on this show, his model, and then their crystal ball, the Fox News decision desk had this state light blue on election day before any votes were counted. Chris Steyerwalt was on TV talking about how Democrats have an insurmountable partisan edge and that the early vote was just so big, it was going to be too much for Republicans to overcome. Rewind the tape, folks, and check it out yourself, and you will see it. And then there was people like Dave Bossie and other people who were associated with the Trump campaign. And they were trying to argue what I'm telling you is true now, and they were right and Chris was wrong, that there is a larger vote for Republicans to take out of the Democratic registration base than there is for Democrats to take out of the Republican registration base. And remember this, because come election day, I'll probably say it a million times, but remember this. Democrats bank early vote big time in this state. Big time. They get a lot. They run it up. It would not be surprising at all to see 65-35 before election day. They are big margins. And then come the actual election day vote, Republicans stomp to the polls. Those older voters that are Democrats on the registration rolls go out and vote, and they go out and vote Republican. It's not as big as it was in the era of George W. Bush, but it's still big. And honestly, Tim, since 2016, despite the closeness of some of these districts in 2018, since 2016, the voter rolls really have just gotten better for Republicans.
Yes.
Unless they lose this vote, which again, it would be on the presidential level. It would be I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked. Last time he won him by 16 points. I'd be stunned if that was the case. Really. So Democrats, let me just show people real quick. Democrats have to run it up over in Vietnam. They got to win Wayne. This is another very important county for them. And the reason why they got to win it, and not just win it, but win it big, is you can clearly see all the red there. When we looked with Pennsylvania the other day, you saw how some of the blue in those highly concentrated areas just completely, shadow out the red. We saw that in Michigan as well. Here, if you remember, if you were watching the other day, you can see the opposite. Even in liberal areas, even in Democratic strongholds, you still see a lot of Republican voters. So it's not like a Dane County where they can win so lopsided. They really can't. They can't. Even if they, and then the independents, they will vote differently depending on where they are. But the independents in here, this area right here, this is where, and here, if I put them back, you'll see them right in here. See that concentration all the way through Cumberland too, by the way, on the presidential level, all the way through and then out through Mecklenburg. There's, scattered with liberal areas, Tim, but in the end, these voters will vote differently than they do up over here. And Democrats will do much better here with them. That's absolutely going to happen. But statewide, in the end, what happens is what we see. Trump did a little bit better than Romney. And, different groups again. They didn't really overlap. It wasn't totally synergistic, synergy between their votes, but let's see if I can get to some of these questions. I got to go back because there's a couple and I don't want people to miss anything. Yes, Cooper is a Democrat. He's a Democrat. But if I pull up right now, I'd have to get rid of the voter file to show you. But let's take a look. He's got, it's a lot. Did they show this right on the front page? No, I'd have to go into the crosstabs. It'll give you guys a headache. But Cooper has a large number of Republicans that support him. 48% in his job approval rating. Now, he's not going to get that vote on election day. He's not going to get 50%, almost half of the Republican vote, 48%. But 48% approve of him. And he's going to get a nice chunk. I think, Tim, it was like 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 last time. It was a lot. It was a lot of votes. That's how he won. And that was also too very close in his first election, a very close race. But he lost too many of his own base. Cooper won more of the Republican base, and there were a lot of those. It's not just the Republicans' actual registration base. Don't forget this with North Carolina. It's not just their what you see in registrations. There are older Democrats who call themselves Democrats, and they will still, like Tim was saying, they will still go out and vote for somebody like Roy Cooper, but they will not typically vote for a presidential Democratic candidate. Can it happen? Sure. Anything can happen. The sky can fall tomorrow. You know what I mean? I'm talking about historically here. It's been a long time since the sky has fallen, and Barack Obama did his bout as well as you can. State has changed since 2008. There's no doubt. And what they're trying to do is my thing. It's still up. Yeah. What they're trying to do is bleed Virginia Beach over here. That's what they're trying to do. So they want to turn this state like Virginia up here. And they're trying to bleed this affluent area in here. And you can actually see it. It's happening. You can see it. It's not impossible at all. This is one of the, I would tell people, Republicans, that I still view this as a pink state, but if they don't do something about this soon, it won't be forever. And that's where I'm going with this. What are your thoughts on this, Tim, with less than 8 minutes left?
Well, that clearly there's a big technology triangle in the Raleigh-Durham area. Probably a lot of it feeds off college graduates from Duke, Wake Forest, North Carolina. But I just think that culturally, to really turn it blue leaning purple, is just culturally, it's a heavy lift.
That gets into this question. This is a great question. Why are there so many enclaves of rural Democrats in the South? Is that due to black
Right. I was
voters,
hoping you'd get to that question.
or is it old white legacy Dems, or both? It's both. That's a
Yeah.
great question. It is what Tim was just talking about. Some of this is cultural. In a state like North Carolina, South Carolina, far less so. But in a state like North Carolina, let me pull it up and see if I can see it, Tim. He did well among black voters in North. He won in our polling. He had 12. Donald Trump won 12% of the black vote in our polling. And let's see what he had in the exit polls here.
In North Carolina. So think about it. That could be, he could push that to 18%.
There in the exit polls, they're saying that it was only 8% in 2016. I'm going to go ahead and say that was wrong. And but if you look inside, whether it was men or women, black men, Trump won 14%. So
he could
again,
push that to 20%.
I got this little saying that I think it is North Carolina and Florida, all great states to emphasize my point. Republicans, and you've probably heard me say it, Republicans don't have a minority voter problem. They have an urban minority voter problem. If you go out into some of these enclaves that Jimmy's asking about, they are more conservative than they are as in the nation as a whole. George Bush proved that. Donald Trump has proven that. And in the end, it's just not the same kind of vote. I think there is a lot about culture, Tim, that plays into that. I just do. There are just also too a matter of faith. Even though we have urban churches, the more rural enclaves are not the same church as the Southern Baptist Black Church in, for instance, Fayetteville. It's just they're not the same culturally. One's much more social justice warrior than the other. The other is more hard, by the book faith, I guess. I don't know how to put it, but that has this plays a big role in it. It plays a big role. So in 2016, it really didn't shock us when we were like, oh, well, he's got 13% of the black vote. When the exit polls showed 8 again, but that was they are adjusting after the fact. The exit polls that came in on 3 p.m. election day were showing a complete wipeout for Donald Trump. It was over for him. He was going to lose every battleground state, including, by the way, he probably was going to lose this one. This one was actually one of the tighter ones, but he was going to lose it all. Even states that he wound up winning by 9 points, he was going to lose it. It was over. And then what happens is as time goes on, they're adjusted. They're adjusted until the next day sometimes. And this is the final, what they've been adjusted to. It's very difficult to play Monday, morning quarterback when you're trying to adjust these exit polls. You don't really know. It's not exact. It really is. And I would say that probably he might have lost a little bit more of the white vote than they estimated, but he won a little bit more of the black vote. And the black vote, by the way, in North Carolina is going to be 20%. That is going to happen. The white vote's going to be about 70%. And it's a small Hispanic population there, but that's what Democrats are trying to change. They would love to see a larger Hispanic population. It's about maybe 7% tops in the electorate. Whites still make up about 7 and 10. Trump won over 60% of them. So if he dips into their base, like I said, with some of those, like Jimmy's question, even, that really is a great question. Like his, question showed, then it's difficult is what I'm saying. Donald Trump would have to lose a lot of those independents that he lost last time. And I'm not saying it's impossible. If the economy is not doing well, then, the same thing what happened with Barack Obama. And by the way, Barack Obama didn't lose those black voters like Hillary Clinton the first time around. Mitt Romney did a little bit better, but not really. It wasn't really significant. What was significant was that he won back those independent votes, Tim, and even some Republicans that voted for Obama in 2008. They gave him a shot. Yeah. But in 2012, they swung back. But they were, again, those are usual Republican voters anyway. That was a historic election in a historically bad economy. And that's why I tell you guys, the economy really does matter. It matters. If Trump wins, um, in a bad economy, he'll become the first one. I mean, FDR had some problems, but that all happened before FDR became president. And then they had war. It was very different. I don't know what Brad has. I see that question too. I don't know. I think Brad, that's, we should get into New Mexico soon, because every time someone brings up Brad Parscale, I just think about New Mexico. I think he's running the president on a fool's errand over there. I really do. But we only got less than a minute left. So let me take us out of here. We will do, I have 2 states in mind for tomorrow. I really want to get to Minnesota. So by the end of the week, because we did so many Midwest states, so I probably will wind up taking that over over a state like New Mexico or New Hampshire. But I wanted to end with a Midwest theme, Tim. Okay, because we did so many Midwestern states this week. But I hope you guys found this insightful. And if I have to tell you guys anything again, remember that when you see these polls, ask yourself whether or not they understand the difference between registration and self-identification, and then whether or not you think that method reached the voter that would be most likely to be caught up in that mistake. Okay. And was it Jimmy? He nailed it. All right. So again, guys, thanks for watching Inside the Numbers, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You will find Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. You guys can follow me over here. I'm going to learn how to do this one day. There it is, at People's_Pundit. And follow Tim Anderson, Tim the Source Anderson on Twitter, if you're not already, at TJ Anderson1. Just great market insight all throughout the day. Those of us watching on Periscope, thanks for all the hearts. Keep up. Give it to us if you haven't already before we close this puppy out. And don't forget to follow either my account or PBD, whichever one you're watching it on. YouTube subscribers, if you haven't liked the page, like the page. Okay. We're trying to get to that new level, and we'll get there with your help. All right. So, and then the ultimate way to follow and support the show is to stay in touch with PPD and subscribe on PPD, ppdnews.us/subscribe, ppdnews.us/subscribe. All right, folks, we will see you again tomorrow, Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. All the best.